Great. So I'm going to, is everyone in the mural? Anyone having trouble? Shout now if you're having trouble. Not hearing any sound, so I think that's a good sign. So I brought everyone to our first board just to give a quick introduction of how to use Mural. What we're going to be doing today is really the only thing you need to know is to add sticky notes. So to add a sticky note, you're going to double click and then start typing. If anyone wants to try that, and then when you add a sticky note, you can see this yellow color. You can change your color to a different size also. There's different shapes. Yep, I'm seeing large rectangular stickies. Great. I think everyone is a mural expert. And then another thing that you'll need today is just how to navigate around the board, which we'll help you with because we'll be summoning you to sections that we're in. But also a great way to do this is if you hold the spacebar down, you're going to see that your mouse turns into a little hand. Also, excuse the sirens if you can hear them. The little hand, then you can just grab around the board and move around very easily if you want to try that as well.
Wow, this feeling of New York right now, I love it.
Apologies. All right, great. And before we jump in and pass the mic over to Microsoft to introduce what ERP systems are, what are we going to do today, and what the Power Platform is, I just want to kind of set the stage and give you a little more of an introduction of what we're going to be doing today and what the agenda is. So what we want to do and what we're hoping to do today is to really uncover how we're going to use the Power Platform, Microsoft Power Platform, and embed finance within existing ERP systems. So adding this embedded finance layer on top of this existing workflow, these existing ERP workflows. So we'll hear from Microsoft about this, then we'll jump into kind of some problem framing to really identify what we're trying to solve for, right, after we understand this. We'll then pass the mic over to Pierre from Finastra to give us an overview of what is embedded finance that we keep talking about. How do we put this into the ERP systems? And then we'll ideate on them. We'll take a couple of these workflows and we'll figure out what we can do and what we can hack together on. So Sohini, any comments before we pass it over to Microsoft?
Yes, just one comment. So for the Microsoft team, I think it's really interesting for us to also understand, besides the Power Platform itself, the genesis of the problem, right? Why is this interesting to you? And if there is any other additional insights that you can give us in terms of the trend that you're interested in specifically within contextual finance, and we'll jump into the problem framing space, which is the next board shortly after. So I'd like to connect the dots between the problems that you see within the ERP space and how you would like to actually tackle that. Okay.
Is this the part where we start presenting? Bring my slides up if so. We have a few slides just to introduce both the Power Platform and then kind of a sample type scenario that other we'll go through.
Can you even copy and paste some of the slides as image in the mural board if you want us to use this as
interesting.
Yeah.
I'll let you decide if any of them are the kind of quality that you would like to paste into the board.
Sure.
All right. So let's do an introduction on Power Platform, just to kind of ground everybody in what that means, and then focus on a couple of the areas specifically that we all think will come into play and are talking about integrating with an ERP. So the Power Platform as a whole, it's a collection of low-code tools that span the entire Microsoft cloud. So that's Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics, which we'll talk about today, as well as standalone applications that could be doing things outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. As we move from left to right across the top, we'll be talking about Power Apps quite a bit today, which helps you build solutions. Power Automate focuses on automating processes. There are other tools that are part of the system we probably won't talk much about today. So Power BI for analytics, Power Virtual Agents for rapid development of intelligent bots. But in general, across the whole platform, these tools work with an integrated set of data connectors, of AI capabilities, a common data service, and management tools so that they can be used in a trusted manner within the enterprise. So let's jump a little bit both into Power Apps and to Power Automate. Power Apps enables developers of really all levels of experience. So from somebody who's never written code in their life to somebody who's a 20-year professional developer, build out and innovate experiences faster in an environment with a user experience that feels a lot like sort of a combination of PowerPoint and Excel. So there's this drag and drop UI. There's formula type logic that you can use for expressions and building out business rules and such. Once a Power App is actually built, it can easily be deployed into the web, something that would be used on a desktop. It can be sent out as a mobile app, and you can even embed it into existing applications, which I think is something that we'll address today. There is an extensibility framework, though, however. So you'll hear us talk a lot about kind of a no-code application canvas, but there's an extensibility framework for professional developers, so you can build out existing components, and what we'll talk about is a no cliffs extensibility. So if you hit a wall with something that's out of the box, right, you can just go to some Azure service and build out the rest of the solution. Power Automate is more about business process automation. So you can use a visual designer to create a business process that works across things that are inside or even outside the Microsoft ecosystem. If you're trying to build an automation with an application that maybe doesn't have APIs, or you could use RPA, remote process automation, to simulate clicks and things like that. Automations can be used for more than just like time-saving personal workflows. You can or streamlining repetitive tasks. It can also be used to move data between systems in a low-code manner. We ship about 350 connectors out of the box. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And pro developers can create custom connectors for any publicly available API. So we're talking about, Finastra products or otherwise, right? You could always build a connector around an API, and that can be used across the whole Power Platform, right? Not just Power Automate or Power Apps. So you see some of the logos on here. There's 350 some of these that go through kind of a vetting process to get published. Connectors are essentially proxy wrappers around APIs that allow you to access these APIs from the Power Platform or even Azure Logic Apps, if you're familiar with that service as an automation and data movement system. But you can connect to a bunch of Microsoft stuff, but also a lot of third-party tools. So there's you can certainly use it for Dynamics. You can use it for SAP, for Oracle, Workday. Any of the really kind of popular systems that are out there in the world. Somebody's written a connector for those. From an extensibility standpoint, as I talked a little bit about earlier, if you're not able to use some of the out-of-the-box stuff that you need to deliver a piece of functionality, you could build your own APIs. You can call out to Azure Functions. You can call cognitive services to get translation or sentiment analysis. You could build your own UI controls with the Power Apps component framework. You have lots of options to extend the platform beyond just what comes in the box. And when you start to add GitHub and Power Platform together, you have this kind of single repo where pro developers and non-developers could work together to build an app instead of just kind of stitching things together down the road, which is a lot of what you probably have seen in the past. To illustrate that with a little bit of an example, you have some boxes added across the top here, just kind of showing visually that you can integrate some Dynamics applications to meet a specific use case, pull in data from other systems in our ecosystem, or even call outside to get different things from various APIs that sit sort of outside the Microsoft world. So with that, Tyler, I will let you talk a little bit about some of the slides that you have in here.
Great. Hi, everybody. So we're going to the next one. So embedded payments. It's good to start with a number, right? And that number, this is from some work we did with Accenture, stands at about 230 billion of potential global revenue in the next few years. So it's a huge prize in terms of where banks, where fintechs, where big tech like ourselves, we need to be playing in. Why? Because from a customer perspective, this is what customers want. They want frictionless, they want digital, they want easy. And really that's when we think about not just embedded payments, but embedded finance, putting these things into where customers are, whether those are large corporate customers, whether they are small businesses, whether they're retail customers is where the puck is going or has gone. It was interesting just this morning. I read an article about the very recent acquisition Amazon did of MGM Studios, and the article was all about whether or not Amazon was going to make streaming payments a reality, in the sense of, while customers are watching the next James Bond movie on Amazon, are they going to enable customers to buy whatever it is that James Bond happens to be using in real time, right? So this is like embedded payments into a non-live event, but that's happening in real time. It's all kind of crazy coming together. But again, this is what people are thinking about. It's where they are. And so it's super important for Microsoft. Microsoft, if you think about what our mission statement is to empower every organization, every person in the world to achieve more. I like to tweak that a little bit and say, it's not just to empower, but to connect every organization and every person in the world to achieve more. And so if you think about that as our mission statement, we are all about embedded payments, embedded finance, embedded everything, making customer journeys frictionless and efficient, and supporting our partners in doing that. And so it was great that Steve, walked you through a little bit of the Power Platform capabilities. Again, look at those as capabilities to help enable embedded payments. So let's go to the next one. So I put this up on the page just to talk about something that we are working through. This is an example. So please don't use this as, this is the path that we're going down. This is just a way to identify how we're leveraging the Power Platform, how we're thinking about it. So the use case behind this is around being able to enable real-time payments within billing systems. Why? Well, in Canada, of course, they already have request for pay. In the US, it's now available and going to proliferate in a bigger way over the next year or so. And of course, around the world, that's happening as well. Why is request to pay really interesting? Well, for a biller, imagine if you can say, hey, look, you owe me, $100. You send that out and the request comes in real-time payment. Good funds get back into my account in real time. So from a billing perspective, and I don't have to use a credit card, right? Don't have to pay exchange fees. It's an account to account. It's pay by bank. It's those capabilities. Really, really interesting and exciting for the industry. So how do they do that in a seamless way? Well, imagine if we can take bank APIs and put those into a billing system, whatever that billing system is. So it could be, just like Steve talked about earlier, one of the big ones like SAP, Oracle, Dynamics, of course. We'd love it to be Dynamics, but we understand that it's not. So it has to be open, if you will. And enable them to send requests for payments, but do it in a really, really simple way. And that's why we love the Power Platform, because it's set up so that really someone who doesn't understand how to code can actually create a connection from those bank APIs all the way through to the billing system. And that really is embedded payments, but it doesn't just have to stop there, right? It could be more so into different types of payments, account status, lending, all sorts of things. And, ultimately you could take that Power Platform as that connector, or some of those capabilities, and merge it with other things to be able to connect to whatever and enable that fluidity of different types of payment or finance APIs. So again, this is just an example, but this is, one way we're looking at how to leverage some of our capabilities to actually create embedded payments. Another side of that is also direct. It's not on the page here as well, but we have APIs and connectors directly into Dynamics. So one of our tools called Dynamics Finance and Operations, you can connect already payment processors. Adeniyi is one of those that's already directly connected. PayPal is directly connected in. And we did that as an organization because we had to, because customers were saying, hey, look, if you want to be competitive, you got to make it easy for me to do e-commerce or run my business from a payments perspective. So it has to be part of that. And as we go further, when we think about teams or when we think about cognitive services, think about natural language IVRs or chatbots, having an out-of-the-box way of connecting payments, of enabling payments for our businesses that use those is going to be really important. So from a strategic perspective, again, very important for Microsoft.
Quick question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
This might be a really silly question, but just going down to first principles, when you were approaching this problem and figuring out how best to attack this, and have a share of wallet within the contextual finance space, did you automatically go to ERP as the way to become the most relevant way to participate in this?
It's a great question. So we did actually. We thought about ERP, and we thought about Dynamics.
Right.
And then we went, wait a second, that's too narrow, right? So then we took a step back and it said it should be any ERP, it should be any billing system, right? Because originally we didn't have the Power Platform in the mix here. We just talked about API connectivity. We didn't think about ease. We didn't think about small businesses who don't have technology teams, all the way up to large corporate who have massive technology teams and how they want to use. So there's got to be something that we can do for everyone and everything. That's how we came back to it. And we took a look at our mission statement. Again, it's about every organization and every individual in the world to achieve more. And so how do we do that? And so we thought this way of looking at things was a much more open way. Again, it's not just about Microsoft, it's about everything. The other thing we looked at quite a bit, again, on the slide here, we tried to make it real. And so we looked at industries. So we looked deeply at healthcare as an example. What's happening in healthcare right now? Well, a lot of virtual visits. And so how do we enable the payments experience as part of the virtual visit? And then we went, oh, wait a second, we actually have to think about the systems that work in healthcare, because it's not like, we'll take Canada and the US as an example, take the Cerners as an example, and like, how do we connect to those which do a lot of the billing and the payment already? How do we think about how that billing is going to connect to insurance companies, and how does that follow through? So there's tons of different systems that make up the ecosystem of payments. And
right.
How do we connect across all of those pieces was something that we had to consider as well.
Right. And the next question, again, a silly one, perhaps. How are you thinking about revenue model on this?
We can take a step back and take, two core pieces that Microsoft thinks about from a revenue model side of things. So what's in it for us? And that's twofold. So one, Power Platform, there's a licensing discussion here, right? Every time it goes through, we enable that. And I would say, the challenge is we have to simplify that. So we kind of have to get out of our own shoes a little bit to think about this as a strategy and reduce some of the costs that we normally would because of the way it's going to be used as a connector, if you will. And then the other side is we really want to encourage organizations to help them on their API journey as well. And so that is all about Azure. And so how do we help them from a developer side, do more things in Azure, again, giving them more tools to be able to create the experiences that they need to be able to provide through APIs down to their clients. So it's twofold. That's how we look at it. From a bank perspective, there's two things. So one is how do we simplify it for the bank? So effectively they can connect to one thing. Their APIs go into one thing that gets them distribution into many. And so they look at that as a distribution side. It's a revenue play for them because they're going to get new customers. And of course, they also look at it from a retention side because they know that if they don't play in that space, others will. And so they're going to start to lose businesses over time. They don't view this as saying, hey, look, next year we're going to lose a whole bunch of clients because they have embedded payments and we don't. They do look at it, though, 5 years from now and understand that if they're not starting to play now, they better start playing later. And banks are thinking about this as, you'll see developer platforms that have been stood up and continue to evolve. So third parties can go directly to that. If you think about Akoya in the US, how can they connect to something in the middle that gets them distribution to many developers, and how do they build on top? And of course, open banking, PSD2 around the world, where jurisdictions have already set those things up. And so there's utilities in the middle to support that.
Great, thank you. I do have some more questions, but I think it's really interesting, the subject. But we can park it for later. I think, Madhav, you have a question, please feel free.
Hi, hi, Tyler. So I think in terms of, the concept is pretty clear. But in terms of impact, are there any statistics, any metrics Microsoft has kind of researched into saying if you're trying to demonstrate the impact it can create on user experience or simplifying those journeys and probably reducing, let's say, day sales outstanding, is it going to reduce it from 25 days to 20 days? Are there any metrics that you can share?
Yeah, so give you an example, efficiency obviously is a huge play. And as we think about, you're right, like AP, AR, automation, those pieces, there's a ton of work. And so the typical example we've been talking about is of a savings of anywhere from 30 to 70%, which is a huge range. It's big because depending on the customer and where they are starting from, it could be bigger and smaller. Like it's all about how much automation happens in there. And so we've got other tools that you aren't seeing here. If we think about embedded payments, or not embedded payments, AR, so we see on the receivable side. So if you're getting payments in the inflows, if the payment is real time, it's embedded, it's coming through. There's a lot of data that comes through that as well. And so what do we do with that data? And then how do we use something like Power Automate or Microsoft Cognitive Services to be able to look at all of that data in whatever format it comes through and then pass it through multiple different systems downstream. And so that's where there's a tremendous amount of savings. And typically on the higher end when we start looking at that. And so we've got some data that we've, I think, looked at from some third parties, some consultancies, Accenture, EY, and others that help substantiate what I just said. But again, every organization is different from a client experience perspective. Again, on the retail side, everybody talks about the Uberization of payments, so the hidden payments behind the scenes, they're not seeing them, and so that's become a real expectation. And of course, as many things, it starts on the consumer side. Everyone says, well, I can do that. Why can't my business do that? And then it evolves into an expectation on the business and the B2B side. So it's, this is just where again, like I said, where the puck is going and where consumer expectations are happening. And that's why on that earlier slide we looked at, which is the, whatever it was, 230, 250 billion revenue potential by 2025, that's all drawn from those expectations, right? That's where people will say, I'm going to choose that product over a product that isn't embedded because it just makes my job easier. And of course, as Microsoft, again, looking at Dynamics and the integrations we've done, we did that because we were forced to do that to be competitive. I mean, we knew it was the right thing, but we're still spending a lot of money to make sure that platform is open and available to everyone, because if we don't, we'll become irrelevant.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
I think we probably made the assumption at some point along the road that everybody knew what an ERP was and what kind of data was in there. So the ERP, enterprise resource planning, right? So from an accounting standpoint, it's a general ledger, and Adeniyi put some good stuff in the chat around that. But you'll see income, expenses, transactions, payables, receivables, bank account info is usually in there. It's that's the kind of stuff that you find in an ERP. So it makes a lot of sense to bring banking capabilities into that context.
Yeah. Yeah, and Pierre, that's exactly right. It's a more Power Platform in front. The other thing that we have to think about when we think about payments, or we are thinking about, is the data that's coming through payments. So there's a new data standard called ISO 20022, which is going to enable the ability to pass any sort of data, with the payment in real time. And so if you start thinking about contracts, if you start thinking about invoicing and billing and all sorts of things, that can be passed through to support the account receivable side and straight through processing across numbers of different systems. This is going to proliferate in a much, much larger way over the coming years. And it's being mandated by SWIFT, which is the global body for sending large value payments, wires. And it's happening across all of the new real-time payments as they continue to pop up across jurisdictions. So another really important part as we think about embedded payments, it's not just the payment transaction itself, but it's the data that comes along with the payment, which is so important.
Tyler, how do you envision this is going to market? Is it going to be delivered as some sort of app store, perhaps?
It's a great question. So a couple different ways. One, we at Microsoft have something that we call our Microsoft App Source or Microsoft Marketplace.
Right.
And so the idea can be that anyone can go to the marketplace and be able to find, payment APIs that are embedded, for example, within the Power Platform and just use them, right? The other way is when people go and buy our products specifically. So in the future, whether it's, could be Teams, whether it's cognitive services, whether it's Dynamics, again, these are like widgets, if you will, that are part of the products. And so they're like, oh, perfect. I have to build, a payment capability or a payment data capability into my product. I just want to click a button and boom, it's there. And then how do we connect to things? Again, Steve talked earlier about all the connectors we have, and we'll continue to build and elaborate on those connectors. So we have third-party payment processors and all those things that start combining. And then, but that's just Microsoft. So outside of that, we also have this idea of, distribution through partners. And this is going to be a much, much bigger play. And so, whether it's Finastra or whether it's a bank as a partner or whether it's a payment processor as a partner, the idea is ecosystems of ecosystems. And so that's really where we're going to get the larger distribution, we believe. And that's how everything starts coming together into a much, much larger global marketplace.
Right. Thank you. Do you still want to go through the rest of the slides? I see you're on 10 or 14.
Yeah, do you want to just flip through really quick, Steve? I'm trying to think of what's next. Again, we probably don't have to go through these in any detail. This is just a view of sort of under the covers what it might look like. Let's go to the next one really quickly. Again, this is just a visual within Dynamics of adding a request for pay as part of a biller experience. Obviously, this is just a one, but you could do mass thousands of bills at the same time if you wanted to. Next one.
The last one was just this is like a leap behind kind of reference so that the developers can have all these links to how you actually get started with Power Apps.
So that's just a little flavor, I would say, of some of the things that we're working on. We're certainly working on some cool things with lots of banks around the world when it comes to embedded payments, open banking, embedded finance, and all those pieces.
Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Steve. Sohini, do we want to maybe move back to the mural now that we've gotten a great overview? Actually, before we do that, does anyone else have any questions before we jump back into the mural? I know that was a lot, so maybe let's open it up first and then we'll jump back in. Nope. Okay, great. Let's jump back into the mural then. I'm going to summon everyone. And Sohini, do you want to take it from here?
Yes. So what we're going to do now is articulate the challenge that you shared with us, which was in a sort of paragraph format, into a very simplistic form where we start with asking the question, how might we? And then framed it the way we thought best. What we'd like you to do now is to go through this and see if we've covered all our bases. And if this sounds about right in terms of what we are trying to achieve through this exercise.
I think that's really good. I don't know if it's only ERP workflows, because it might be also outside of, it's kind of interesting because we said, oh, ERP system, right? But it's almost like, because it's before ERP system, it might be even any kind of, I would say, business-centric workflow, because if it's ARAP, it could be something a bit different. But I mean, I like the way it's written. I think it's exactly what was suggested. It's very good.
Business workflow that already has some form of input with an ERP system, right? I mean, because that's our entry point for the solution.
Yes, correct. Right. Or maybe enable customer to orchestrate financing as part of their business ERP ecosystem.
Orchestrate finance. Say again, sorry. Orchestrate.
Orchestrate financing within their business ERP ecosystem. Right, because it might be more than just the ERP. It might be like multiple points.
Mm-hmm.
But this is very perfect. Like we were discussing, I don't think that was filled before, right? You just filled it during the during the
No,
talk
it
we
was
had.
filled before.
Yeah.
It was filled before.
Oh, brilliant! You saw the future.
Yeah, yeah, we did. We kind of did. We were just hoping that this was it, but we did hear some interesting points. So you see these yellow stickies here. So we talked about connecting every organization as part of the mission statement, and I think you used the term help enable embedded payments. And here we're talking about orchestrating finance. So it's slightly larger than just payments, because contextual finance can be technically more than just payments, which Pierre, you'll be covering shortly, right? So we can come back and review this once you've done, your bit, which is the contextual finance deep dive in context of ERP and business, workflows. But this is what we're thinking at the moment. So Tyler, Steve, what do you think? Are you happy with it?
This is Nii. I wanted to add a few.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
you guys
can't hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
No.
Or I can hear you. Or I could.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, there you go. That's better.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I had a little echo. When I think about financing, or maybe if you want to do embedded financing, I think about 4 or 5 things, right? There is the embedded deposits, embedded payments, embedded lending, or even embedded wealth management. So when you're thinking about that, is how do you orchestrate and simplify and that, so that you can do more throughput or reduce cycle time for that. So I think about a bigger part of that. So I don't know how to include all that, but this is what I think. So it's just more than payments.
Correct. Yep. Agree.
Yeah, and I think actually that's a great segue if we can pass it over to Pierre now, just being conscious of time, to kind of dive in deeper, right? What are those different products and different areas of embedded finance we can explore?
Thank you, Katrina. So I prepared 5 slides that I'm going to do none of them because I don't want to waste our time. I'm going to go straight into what I mean by this. And I just put like 2 of the content of my slide at the bottom. And it's more like to give you a history of embedded or why banking as a service is real. So I started with this infamous quote for Bill Gates that said, banking is necessary, banks are not. I'm going to ask to be followed if you want to come over here. And there is a reason why Bill Gates was able to say that. And the reason is because between the 1990s and the 2000s, there's been a giant shift in the way we manage online interaction. And if you think about the 1990s, it was unthinkable to do payment online, right? Every time you would do a payment, you would at best send a check, not by email, but by actual mail, send a check to do payment and stuff like that. And I'm starting in payment for a reason. It's because payment was the source of everything. If you don't have payment, you can't do lending. If you don't have trust, you can do any kind of financial bi-party activity because you cannot trust the source of the people that are exchanging data. When we're using credit card existed for a while now, we would still use it face-to-face. There were a high risk of online risk and fraudulent activity. And again, for good reason, right? In 1990s, if I was using my credit card online, there was no encryption, meaning that anyone could see everything that was going online and I could just see it right away. And you see this like advertisement from CompuServe that was actually released in 1994 that said by the year 2000, the world may catch up with the way CompuServe electronic mall. They think about it as an electronic mall, right? The shopping online was, it was really trying to fit like a square inside a circle. It would just not work, but the technology started being there. And it started in 1994 with what people call the mother of all years in terms of internet activity, because it was an encryption certificate that came in. So we knew about basically private key and any kind of RSA algorithmic for a little while, because that was the key behind credit card, but we never found a way to achieve it online. And in 1994, when encryption certificate became real, that means you could finally transmit data in a trustworthy manner over internet. And that's when but technologists start saying, we can do payment online. And in 1995, that's when Amazon came in, or Auction Web. And if you don't know Auction Web, that makes sense because they rebranded themselves to eBay later on. And you had company like VeriSign that started really managing the certificate chain and having like centralized certificate and centralized encryption for all the payment. So when that became efficient, what started working was business to business kind of payment, and lending started coming from there. And in 1998, when PayPal came in, that's when they start saying, okay, you know what? Actually, we can do people-to-people payment anymore. Now, fast forwarding post 2000, you have like Venmo, Apple Pay, Google Pay. None of them are bank related, right? Venmo, literally, there is no bank behind. So that means that we really, because of the way decentralized exchange became possible online, right? Anyone could have a web server or host anything online. And because we were able to completely encrypt it end to end, that's when we started having this capability to do payment without using any kind of bank. And then we moved toward the world of unconscious banking. Banking is way more than just payment now, right? Lending, funding your life, growing wealth, saving money, all of this is done online. And most of this is done unconsciously. The best example I have for this is Acorn, right? Acorn is like a small company that said basically every time you pay something like $2.90, the 10 cents, I'm going to charge you $3, the 10 cents extra are going to go directly in your saving or in an investment, in whatever kind of investment you want. This is super interesting because that means that we started making saving unconscious. We realized a lot of people were not saving money and it was kind of dangerous for the end of the month and stuff like that. So there were ways to make it unconscious. There are also centralization of data. If you think about Mint, where you can have a view of your entire finance, that's kind of what makes them powerful. SoFi, where people would just take refinance their debt and find a way to pay it back without thinking about it. Why? Because SoFi was able to extract information or extract payment and money directly from any kind of account you had, right? So this is extremely relevant. And then they started connecting everything. Let's say if you have a credit card, the points can go directly towards Amazon, and you have like contextual data available. Sometime on your bill now on your credit card, it will say, hey, do you want to be able to pay back with like some specific point or get this percentage coming over there, etc. And then after, even more in context, you had like short-term funding like Klarna or getting car with no interest. There is like car vending machine now where you can pay and you have like a loan that's already set up directly. So what can we see in this movement toward unconscious banking? It's data. Everything is driven by data and being able to have multiple data that take decision for you to make it as easy as possible, right? So how do unconscious lending can show, like, for example, that you are usually drinking some coffee like every day at this time. So if I make you go to this place, it's going to be cheaper and so on. Supermarkets start doing it a while back by using your telephone number, right? And giving you points so they could track what you were doing and getting all this data. But they didn't really know how to handle or use this data, right? And it's, again, if you go to the supermarket 3 times a week, there is so many information they can get and they can tag into your habit, making it completely unconscious. So having like, and again, to put it in frame with the ERP is that there is so much data right now that live in multiple ERP and multiple systems. We need to find a way to extract it and to plug it in the world of finance in order to be able to move forward with this kind of banking as a service. So it was more like a vision of what was happening. And it goes really well with, I think you were mentioning like people want frictionless and easy. This is really the unconscious banking experience. You don't want to have the barrier of entry of a bank. You want it to be in context and relevant to you. So that was my 2 cents on this. I tried to go through my 5 slides in less than 2 minutes, but it should give you
well
like
done,
a idea of what you can do.
Perfect.
Awesome. So should we?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Sohini.
No. Good question to ask. If there's any questions or comments at this point. I guess I would have just one open statement at this point. Pierre, would you want to comment about the connecting dots between what you just said and ERP in general, right? Just for us to set the scene, because the next stage of what we're going to crack now is going deep into what does ERP mean, right? Because it's this big buzzword we may or may not be using directly, depending on our roles. So embedded finance in context of ERP systems. What does that mean for us? Could you break that down for us a bit?
Yeah, of course. And I think, again, ERP, as you said, it's a big word. So enterprise resource planner, what does that mean? There is a lot of pieces in an ERP. So it could be payroll, HR. They could be, as we said, account receivable, account payable. There could be some forecast done. There could be FP&A, all of these kind of finance things that are related, but also managing inventory, right? And even if you look at the ERP from Microsoft, there are a lot of different pieces that could fit together. There is also sales planning in it, right? I mean, Salesforce in some way can act as an ERP for some pieces of it. So if we want to have a view of an ERP like more like step back, it's more all the data and all the actionable that a company has in order to be able to move forward and plan for what's going to happen next, right? And this usually is extremely related to finance, because in the end, what matters is number and how much money you're going to make, how you're going to pay your employee, how you're going to be able to forecast the next best product that you want to sell, and so on. And all those kind of input come into the ERP. Now, the question is, what can we extract from this, and how can we tie it to finance? And on top of that, companies use more than one ERP. They have multiple data sources. So how can you aggregate all this in one point in order to do the best decision and to make finance seamless in any way?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. All right, so now if we can all follow Katrina over to the relevant section on Mural, we can get cracking on the actual exercise, which I guess we'll need to squeeze in as much as possible within the remaining time.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, right, is we just, learned from Pierre and from the Microsoft team that there are a lot of components within an ERP system. I think it was someone from the chat wrote this great kind of breakdown of it, right? We have the accounts payable, procure to pay, we have accounts receivable, treasury cash management, which we've kind of broken up into a couple other stickies here. Does anyone have any, thoughts, key interests in certain ones of these ERP applications? Because we want to kind of do this, a quick kind of voting session and see what are the top two that we want to dive in, because since we can't tackle everything in the next hour, unfortunately. So trying to see, how do we want to scope what an ERP system is? We have sales, marketing, purchasing, HR and payroll, financing, manufacturing. Is there anything else that we should add to these sticky notes here before we vote on which ones to proceed with?
I mean, the idea is there are a lot more that we could add. I think the idea for us is to zero in on the ones that are most interesting to us. Yeah. So, keeping that in mind, are there any other ones that any of us would like to add to this list, and then we can vote on it?
Yeah, perfect. Invoicing, yep. Supply chain. I love that everyone's just throwing down sticky notes, so keep doing that if you don't want to come off mute.
I wonder as well if all of them may have like some subcategory in common, right? I mean, we mentioned ISO 20022 earlier, right, for payment, but like maybe HR, invoicing, purchasing, and supply chain have some stuff in common, and maybe that's what we should tackle, right? As part of the data that's coming in or so on. I don't know. This is just an idea. I don't want to make it too wide as well, But
chain are pretty tied
they
together,
do
at least
have
in our
something.
ecosystem.
Say that again, Steve. Sorry.
It's finance and supply chain, like at least in our ecosystem, like they're almost the same thing, effectively.
Okay.
No, and sales and marketing, I mean, to me is probably more CRM like
Right.
than it is truly like ERP functionality. There's aggregates and such in ERP, but those feel like a slightly different thing.
Mm-hmm.
One thing
that's a very good point as well. Yeah, CRM and ERP can be sometimes confused between each other.
Yeah. wanted to mention that in terms of any industry you think of or any company, they're going to need to pay something or payments, right? If you think about it, all companies are going to need a general ledger, right? And you have, like just like mentioned, the accounts payable, accounts receivable. There are two sides of a payment, so you're going to always have that. Every time you're going to have to pay someone. And if you look at ERP, I remember when I used to implement ERP, the first thing they implement is GL and AP because you have to pay your suppliers. So general ledger and AP is typically the first thing they implement, and then they implement like the AR part of it, and then you have interfaces. So you're going to find a whole lot of that. How do you make the two sides work? How do you pay, and how do you receive payments?
We can't hear you anymore. It feels like you just dive underwater.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, what I was going to say is you're going to have two sides of a payment: the account receivable part, right, and then the accounts payable. So how do you pay vendors, or how do you get payment from your customers? So a lot of times when you implement ERPs, the first thing a lot of companies will do is implement the general ledger part of it because you got to do all those financial reporting. But then how you get the sub ledgers to come in, the AR part of it and the payments part of it. So I guess when we're thinking about it, what if you can eat the whole ERP, like what do you concentrate on? I think a good way to look at it is to see what can you do, maybe in terms of payments, or maybe in terms of lending, if you will, if you want to go back. But payments is typically the easiest part to kind of put in first. But then the question.
Is the goal to make it faster, to make it easier, to have like pre-integrated APAR or subledger? So then you can the deployment faster?
Yeah, I actually that's a good question, Pierre, because the thread I want to pull on there is when you're doing ERPs, a lot of times they have to do interfaces at the end of the month, which is very kludgy, if you will, right? Like if you have wires or you have maybe crypto payments or things like that, the ERPs, they typically do 70 to 80% of it, and then they have to write customizations and things like that. Like, for example, wires. How do you automatically get wires to be able to make payments? How do you embed for companies that are not banks, right? How do you do that? So is there a way to kind of use maybe low-code, no-code, or APIs to extend those functionalities, whereby it becomes so easy to extend the ERP to do things or to automate processes pre and after? Right, you could use maybe the Power Automate or things, or like the RPA or things like that to simplify to make it faster, and to make it so that you don't have to have as many mistakes, right? So that's the thing. If you look at the assets of a company and look at all the processes from taking the payments and getting paid and putting in the GL and extending all the non-standard types of payments that you have now, how do you automate that without making a very large customization, right? The opportunity is there, is to simplify all those processes and all the manual processes that go around the ERP. Can you automate it? Can you simplify it?
Sorry, I started putting stuff in boxes already. That's my habit.
Pierre. You're
sorry,
a bit ahead of the curve. But before we jump into the actual grid itself, do we want to zero in on which two of these boxes can we all agree on and then take that forward?
Well, I think
Katrina, do you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think one of them we've already kind of agreed on, which is like this APAR subledger.
What's the second one?
What is the second one, right? So let's do a voting session on that.
Yeah. Quick one.
I'm going to.
Can I ask one question for you while you're thinking about that? What industries would you like to get into now as a Finastra, as a company? Or what industry would you like to empower? Is it just financial services, or healthcare, or bank, retail, or telco?
It's a very good point. So as Finastra, we do, I would say we're interested both in telco, in healthcare, in retail banking, and in any kind of financial services. But I think the focus right now is more like how to enable this kind of financial services through our North America community market, right? So the small bank, retail banking, SME bank, what can be done for them. But we also have like payment solution, like our payment platform that could be used for and that's used across, like in Europe, they process like almost all the Swift payment in ISO 20022 message. So I don't want to can us into like a small solution. I think the goal is really to understand what would be the most beneficial and the quickest aspect.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that question, Pierre, is because if you're looking at to go into those industries, you kind of look at, can you make those industries do things that banks do today, right? For example, can you do micro lending? Can you embed those things? So if you're thinking of, okay, payments, but do you want to even think bigger? Like, for example, if you're a Tesla, you can also do lending. You can lend as the person is trying to buy a car, right? Or if they're telcos, you can provide those microservices. So if you're doing that, how might you be able to provide payment services or lending services for them? So it's not just the GL and AP and AR, but can you increase your market by doing some micro lending and partnering with a bank? If you're a telco or you're a healthcare or you're a retail company, and there you can have those micro services.
Music to my ear, Adeniyi, because that's exactly what we're trying to do with Steve and another initiative as well.
Okay.
Like micro lending as a service. So I completely agree with you. So it's good that we went to the same conclusion. But I think like you raised also an interesting point here, which was how can we make ERP interface easier as well, simpler. So we are currently building an offering for lending as a service in order to connect small bank with Microsoft. That's something we're already building right now. We're more like trying to tap into other point of view or other aspects that could be done as well. But I completely agree with you. I think this is a hot market right now.
So Pierre, just going back to the question of which industries or what kind of contexts are we trying to enter, right? Embed the point of finance, or which is in lending, or in terms of point of purchase, where the borrower is trying to pay using a variety of means. So if you look at supply chain finance itself, so if somebody is buying a phone, so you've got B2B2C models, where you got a consumer trying to buy a phone from a lender, from a telecom provider, and that in turn the telecom provider could be providing a lending service to the consumer to buy, which is buy now pay later kind of model. And then you've got the same supplier, or who is the telecom provider selling that phone, looking to pay off his suppliers or his people that get his inventory and or manage part of his supply chain. And that's where you're trying to embed the accounts payable APIs into that ecosystem. So from an ERP standpoint, shouldn't we be looking at supply chain itself as the primary use case than saying AR or AP? Because those modules already exist and they're quite integrated with the payments ecosystem. We won't change anything in that situation.
But we can make it easier, maybe. I completely understand what you're saying. I agree that there is more, but should we either way? I mean, I like the idea that, and sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, Adeniyi suggested that how to make integration faster and out of the box. I like it. I think that's also a very interesting point of view that I didn't thought. We are very focused on the finance side, Madhav. So it's easy for us to say, hey, you know what? I want to focus on this and this and this. I like this input of like, you know what? We just need to make it faster. That by itself is relevant. But I completely agree with you as well, Madhav. Sorry, I think there is a voting session coming in right now.
Did you guys
we're still waiting for a few?
Did you want to add lending to it, or the supply chain finance to the voting? Like I'm only seeing, I see sales invoice, but I don't see the lending or the sales finance, supply chain finance.
Good point. I think lending live everywhere. Lending can also live in HR, payroll. Lending can live in purchasing, in sales, right?
Yep. It's a big epic. Lending is a big epic that you can have in everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's actually kind of moving to a different section of what we're going to be doing once we pick kind of these segments, if you want to call them that, in ERP. So maybe parking right now, like if it's lending or whatever it may be, to really just focus on what area within the ERP system that we want to kind of deep dive into a little bit more. So we can go back into this great lending conversation, but it will just be within one of these that we're discussing right now. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right, let's just give it another 20 seconds and close because we've spent a lot of time voting.
All right, everyone put in their last votes. I'm gonna end the session in 7 more people. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, you should see that the voting results are on your screen right now. So we had 6 votes for purchasing, 4 for finance. So
Yay.
purchasing.
Great,
Thank you for participating in that. And we will move to our next section here, which we've already started to fill out. All right, the first kind of function that we're looking at is this general ledger APAR. Sohini, do we want to maybe break this up?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the objective here, I think some of us were just jumping ahead a little bit. So we want to do this in a structured manner so we all understand why and what we're trying to get to, right? So what we're trying to do is break down at the core what the ERP is being, this specific one that we've chosen is being used for, who are the primary users. Therefore, we would, want to look at it from the lens of what pains does this user have that we are actually solving for, right? So who are the users? What is their primary need? Why are they using it? And then we're going to look at specific things that fit into the contextual finance space, such as payments, lending, investments, insurance, etc. If there's others that we want to add, and pick the ones that fit back into the need statements that we put down here for that specific type of ERP. And then we get into the solution space and say, all right, this makes sense. Why don't we do this? Because this solution would actually really work for this user using this ERP system. Does that make sense as a story?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start tackling who are users for GL subledger APAR.
And why don't we, for this, I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes, and I want everyone to just kind of rapidly put down their ideas of who our users are for this, and then we'll discuss it. So I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. And if anyone's having any trouble, just remember double click and you can add a sticky that way. For anyone who's new to Mural again, just double click and start typing. As we have our last thoughts, I'm going to start grouping some of these similar users that we're seeing pop up. So I'll be moving some of these around.
Thank you, everyone. That's really good participation. There's a lot of stickies in there. I'm always happy to see a lot of stickies in there. So it looks like based on our responses, there's various different personas that are using this particular ERP system. Pierre, do you have any comments in light of what we're about to do in terms of, contextual finance and who these users are?
So I kind of put like the FP&A, so the financial planner forecasting. Yep. I also don't know how to type, it seems, but someone else put FP&A as well. So right. For me, it would be accounting, revenue. I put risk officer for some reason, because I think understanding your exposure as a risk officer might be interesting, but that I think we all agree on who they are, right? I mean, so far.
Yep.
But that would be my thoughts here.
Yeah, no surprises here whatsoever. I think we're all in alignment, more or less, on the kind of profile of the person that is using this. So without further ado, unless anyone else has any other comments or questions, I'd like to move on to the what section.
Just maybe one thing, I don't think the head of sale would be in this place.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe, but I don't know if the head of sale would be part of this, because the head of sale would be more caring about making the money. It doesn't really care about how the money is funneled or how much money is around. He has quota and he's following his quota, right? The quota are set up by the FP&A and so on.
So Pierre, let me throw a counter to that.
Thank you.
When we look at revenue generation and the whole BNPL surge has happened because organizations are trying to increase sales by offering a lending product to consumers by tying up with BNPL providers. So in the B2B space, if somebody's trying to kind of make a sale, and in the process of making the sale, they're able to embed finance into the deal, they are leading, they're the leading persona in the transaction. How to do it and how to make it happen is going to be with somebody in the finance or integration section, but the primary empathy is with the guy who's selling, and he's trying to make the sale happen to his customer who can't pay in full by embedding finance into the deal. So just look at your car buying experience today. When you go to buy a car and you're interacting with the sales guy there, and they're working out a finance deal for you in terms of to meet your various financing needs or budgets. I'm taking the same concept and context, and therefore I've included the head of sales in that situation.
Is this going to be done via the ERP system though?
Sales are happening in invoice. So when you're making sales onto an ERP system, right?
I don't think so. Right?
I see the point though, right? Like, does that start to, especially for just BNPL scenarios in general, like, are we sort of veering off into like commerce platforms, point of sale, CRMs and such?
Yeah, good idea, Adeniyi. I think primary and extreme users. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that would kind of like accommodate maybe a salesperson who may be looking at the reporting or things like that, but they probably won't go into AR or AP unless they want to really find out something. But yeah, correct. Primary users will help identify, trying to solve for everything.
Yeah, and they're probably like rolling up like a forecast or something that ends up in like cash flow forecasting for an ERP.
That's why I put FP&A there. They probably would be talking to the FP&A person.
Okay. All right. If you're all happy with that, shall we move on to what? What is the need they're trying to meet? And probably give it 2 minutes on this.
Yep.
This is it needs a little bit of thinking. I would urge you to deep dive further than, statements such as remove complexity. I think that's a very generic statement. That's what ERP is meant to do in general. So if you can go a level deeper and ask why, that would give you a better sense of the real reason or the real need. So if that was Pierre, I challenge you to go a little deeper in the remove complexity bit.
Or even to that, right? I challenge everyone to think of what is the complexity.
Yeah.
That's a question for everyone to sticky notes down on.
Do we have the timer on, Katrina?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, I may need to shrink the stickies.
Yeah. Shrink. Oops. I'm going to add another 30 seconds to the timer since we were chatting while it was going. All right, we have 17 more seconds. So writing down your last thoughts. Great. Let's see.
Reduced time has occurred a couple of times. Error management, reconciliation.
Someone want to talk a little bit more about the reduce O2C cycle time? Since I know this is about, we had a couple about reducing time.
Yeah, and that's more on that order to cash side. Like, how do you get paid faster on your payables?
Mm.
I'm going to group this in our reduction of time section here.
Is there anything that's obvious that's missing, or have we more or less covered ground and covered most scenarios in terms of needs? Any last thoughts?
I would add like something like crypto. I think that not crypto or even like gaming, or how do you do things that are not like outside maybe that ERP that ERP doesn't typically touch? How do you include that in this ecosystem as you're doing payments? Because that we normally know about wires, we know about all sorts of payments, but there may be not non-standard payments today that you have to think about in the future, right?
Yep, very good point. Thank you.
So like odd channel or future channel?
Yes. Untapped channels right now. The ones that are latent, the ones that are trending that you're not thinking about, like my daughter or my whatever, they're not going to go to the bank. They want to pay for things. Yeah. A lot of times they're using their iPhone, they're doing something. They want to pay for something. Or like even think about the metaverse. How do you handle payments there? There's not a lot of ERP in the metaverse.
Yeah. So maybe crypto payments and also integrating to other platforms.
Yep, exactly.
So it isn't embedding into the consuming apps. So whatever they're consuming, or because that's the point of consumption, right? Consumption or exchange.
Okay. Are we happy that we've covered everything? Any last comments? All right, let's move on to the really interesting question now. So we have payments, lending, investments, and insurance right now under contextual finance scenarios to be considered. Is there anything else we want to include to this list?
Two things. They might be under investment, but asset management, wealth management, and the other thing, I mean, it could be anywhere. It's probably gaming or gamification.
Gamification, all right.
Gaming, I was gaming or gamification.
Okay.
Is that I would challenge that. Is that a section of embedded finance gamification? Is that just more of a,
Actually,
game?
It raises the question: what are we trying to say here? So, are we saying does it fit in the travel industry? Does it fit in, for example, when you look at corporate travel, or you're looking at expense management? So you've got taxis or fleet management. There could be different industry segments where you're going to actually have embedded finance.
Right, but I think what we're trying to do here is, within, say, gamification as a concept, what exactly is happening there? Is it just a payment? So would it come under payments then?
But that's the product, right? So again, payments or lending, from a finance standpoint, payments, lending, investment management, or insurance is a financial product.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Where are we embedding these products into is, I thought, the question.
The question is, first of all, what we're trying to do is, what are the products that we need to consider, the universe of products that we need to consider, and then look at all the things that we've mentioned here in the what and the who, and map back to whatever is relevant, right? So we say, given that this is what the need is, here are the relevant products that might fit into this particular story that's emerging. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So instead of gamification, maybe I might put gaming, because if you say, where does embedded finance fit in? It does definitely fit in payments easily, lending, investments, all those ones, they're typically standards. But for the future, where would you need that where it doesn't exist today? Probably maybe gaming could be one. There's a lot of people that play games, right? And where's the ecosystem? What's happening there, right? What do they need to make it simpler?
I think.
But how is that?
Good.
Sorry, Katrina, go ahead.
I think gaming and gamification maybe is moving into our next section, which is the how, and where it really is, because this where space, we're trying to really identify, maybe where is the wrong term, maybe that's where we're getting tripped up in this. So maybe it's more just, maybe it's another what, really, like what embedded finance product, like what finance product fits within these needs that we just identified, that personas using this wants
that
to
makes
solve.
Yeah,
right, let's reword it to which. Yeah. Katrina, you can edit the where. Let's call it a which. Which of these embedded finance products fit into the problem space as we're defining it on the left-hand side?
Yeah. And you could put a gaming with a question mark too, because it may not fit exactly there if you want.
All right.
Again, if we're concentrating on the one that we voted for, right? So when we start looking at...
Yeah. So right now we're talking about GL subledger, right? So for that particular context, which of these, assuming we've considered all the products that exist, which of these are most relevant to the definition of the who and the what that we have here?
See, at the top level, all four can fit in perfectly, right? Because ultimately you're managing a balance sheet. So, you can easily put payments in terms of on account payables because that's under GL, lending on account receivables because you want to reduce your order to cash, you want to reflect that on the asset side of the business from short term to long term, you can change your asset category. Investments, again, if you've got surplus, you can embed that into an investment product, whether it's overnight treasury or any kind of product there. And insurance, because there's a lot of trade receivables and payables and or inventory movement, you have insurance embedded there. So I think we'll have to go one level deeper to see where do we see the impact happening, or what specific product do we think is going to make an impact.
Yes, please. Go ahead, one level deeper, please. And anyone else that disagrees with Madhav so far, if all of them are relevant to the what and who we've discussed so far.
Maybe as we do this, we can invite everyone to start putting down that next level, right, of detail. So if you have any ideas of specifically, as we have Madhav putting in right now, FX payments, cross-border payments, what else do you see in this second level of detail within these four areas: payments, lending, investments, and insurance? And actually, Sohini, I'm going to set the timer for a minute and invite everyone to really put down sticky notes on this second level.
And while we're doing it, let's keep referring back to the what and just use the notes there to guide your thinking, the next level thinking for payments, lending, etc. to see if we are checking off each of these need statements that we put there.
Yes.
I think we had a good question also in the chat that was a while back, but from Adeniyi said, do you want to categorize user to primary and extreme user? I think understanding the fringe user might be something interesting later. Because crypto is definitely a rail for a fringe user, right?
Yep.
Yeah, crypto is one. The other one that I would probably add there is unbanked. The unbanked, right? How do you bring them into this ecosystem? And how do you account?
Yeah, I was surprised to discover that Walmart was actually one of the institutions that was using a lot of money for the unbanked. They would just put cash at Walmart so other people outside of the country or on the other side of the country could take the cash away from Walmart as well. So they behave like a bank without being a bank.
Yeah. There's 21 million unbanked people in the US and 42 million in Mexico and 1.7 billion in the world that do not have a bank account. That's huge.
But is that our user of this, right? I want to kind of rope us back in.
No, those are extreme users. Those are extreme users. They're not primary users.
I mean, if they're unbanked, they're unlikely to use an ERP. That's correct.
Right. I think this is a really important topic, and I will pitch that we have other sessions that are going to be going into sustainability and circular economy and this world of the unbanked to solve problems there. But I think I would kind of want to reorient us to think about these primary users that are using ERP systems, right? That are using the APAR, the sub ledger. It's in this sense not the unbanked, right?
But Katrina, it might be like, let's say if you're buying coffee on the ERP, you're getting coffee from a coffee producer that doesn't have a bank, for example, it might be relevant. But I agree, it's very French, but it might be relevant, but it's not the main.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to understand that because we're talking about users of an ERP system, right? And that's the who that we're solving for. So I don't understand how an unbanked person has access to said ERP system that we're actually solving for at the moment.
So you're
I think
100%
probably
Yeah.
what
there
could
might
be
an
relevant
actor.
is the scenario where you've got somebody in the, let's say, developed nations procuring coffee, let's say, or fruits from an underdeveloped nation where you've got those farmers or agencies not directly connected to the mainstream banking ecosystem. And you
Right.
want the ERPs to be able to bridge across the traditional banking system. And let's say if you're using crypto, so for example, there's a startup called AgriLedger, they do that, right? So they connect farmers to mainstream ecosystem, banking systems in the Western world.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think that there are primary use case at this stage, but
Right.
it can be.
And I would say that that's not I understand that they are a part of the ERP ecosystem, right? Because they're on one side of it. But within the lens that we're looking at right now, they are not the APAR side of these personas that we identified here, right? With all the list here.
Okay. I think we've established that. So are we happy with the detailing that we have in terms of which financial products fit into this? And we've said all of them, and we've got various elements that we think are worth exploring further, right? So instant FX payments, cross-border, crypto, securitized loans, insurance, smart contract loans. So we've covered mostly insurance, lending, and payments. Is any of them investment? I don't see anything that's investment led.
No, I don't see.
So can we think about something on the investment side?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how. That's more like a treasury operations.
Yeah.
I'd imagine use of an ERP, which I'm not that close to.
So let's say
Yeah,
cash as a
the only thing-
service, if that's something we embed. So Pierre, this is something we've been working on, right? Where you're talking about cash as a service and you can embed that into liquidity management or as part of the ERP to optimize your cash balances.
I see. For treasury itself, right?
Yes. And it's a part of investment itself, managing and optimizing your returns on capital.
Yeah. And maybe also understanding all the margin call and all the amount of cash you need to keep as a safety,
Yep.
Like cash and deposit and stuff like that.
Two areas I would see in investment are the back office in terms of at the end of the day, because at the end of the day they have to report to their GL. So the interface into the GL, once they do they have their positions. The second part of it would be the forecasting, like you said, like what is maybe this is maybe using maybe an AI model that can integrate and then look at all the payments, look at all the things, the cash flows, inflows, outflows for the day. Look at those history, build those models, and then forecast what could be the balance or what could be the risk for a position. So that I will look at that. But that may be, you have to extend a lot to that. But if you have a model that does that, you can probably plug that in. And then you can do as part of FP&A forecasting, what could be that position B, or what could be the risk of B, and how do you interface with the investment systems that hedge funds or asset managers are using. But that's an extreme, use of that, but it's possible.
I wonder how I would. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder how I would put it down, though.
Maybe liquidity forecasting, liquidity and risk forecasting.
Yeah, there is both the liquidity but also like the risk of the business, I think, like especially. So I know in the world of capital market, what you do is you run a lot of simulation according to specific market events, right? For example, when you're going to run your VAR on your portfolio and stuff like that, I wonder if it's something that small company want to be able to do as well. What if a new wave of COVID hit, for example, or something like that? How it will impact my sales and so on. I'm just putting it out there as like an idea. I don't know if it's something that's actually done or not.
Yeah, Pierre, it may not be done today, but it's definitely needed, right? Because if you're looking at all the things that may happen, I might look and say, hey, I'm assuming, okay, I know what the GDP is, I know what the what the risk is, but maybe there's a risk of geopolitical events. For each of those things, there's scenarios. How do I take what's in my ERP and all that stuff and figure out what it could be? What would the balance sheet look like? What would the income statement look like? What would be my Sharpe ratio look like for my portfolio? Right, it may not be done today, but I promise you something that they're probably thinking about. Can I build a model that I can use to extend by? Because if it's a model where I can put all that information in, they may be using something like a Power Platform. I can actually call like a RESTful service that does that, and that RESTful service does. I feed it information, and it's there, and then it's presented in my ERP.
Yeah, that makes sense. It goes really well with the how as well, almost like we're already going in the how, but
yeah, kind of going there. So I think it's a good segue into how now. So the question there is, how now do we solve for this need with the identified embedded finance products that we've just listed? So let's put in 2 minutes there, because we have less than 30 minutes now to crack the next one. So I want to wrap this side up as quickly as possible.
Yep, I just set the timer. And so again, just, jumping off of that a little bit, really think about in this how do we solve for it? What does that, going back to the Power Platform, what does that Power Platform need? What are the, tools within there? What does it look like for the end user? And then thinking back to, again, all those needs that we identified, what they're trying to meet. All right. We'll give everyone a couple seconds to wrap up their last thoughts.
I think your computer, Katrina, is going crazy. We can hear the fan through the microphone.
Oh, wow.
It's not going crazy, but we can hear the fan from the microphone. I thought it was my computer. I was like, oh my God, it's making noise. But then I realized
It's not really even going that much. That's funny. It's worked harder in the past.
it worked harder in the past.
I've noticed this, the whirring sound actually only starts after we start the recording.
Mm.
It wasn't this noisy until we did.
Interesting. Well, another ticket to add in the Microsoft Teams support.
The recording's all cloud-based. It's not like the old Skype days when it happened locally.
All right, as people finish up, one want to call out anything they find really interesting here? They have questions they want to talk about before we move on to the next section? Well, I think it's time to move on, Sohini, but we have some good ideas still coming in.
Wait, let's just give it another 20 seconds and we move on.
All right.
And for those of who have finished, maybe we can just start reorienting to the next ERP product type, which is purchasing. And obviously we'll go through the entire list of questions again, such as who, what, which. So let's start mentally reorienting to the who for purchasing for whoever's finished the other section.
Multitasking, huh?
Yep, why not?
All right. I'm going to move
Right.
section and summon everyone over here. So why don't we do what we did for the last function? So within purchasing, who are our users of that? I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. And please put down sticky notes for who those people are, who are our personas that we're thinking about here.
We'll need to be a little bit faster on this round because we're, a little short on time on this one.
Yeah, and there's probably a good overlap with the other one too.
Yep.
It's just especially in small,
Yep.
like a smaller business, that's people are going to be wearing multiple hats and doing both these things.
Yep. Twenty seconds left.
All right, that is time. Any thoughts, comments on this before we move to our next section?
I think we're already doing the next section, right?
We have a very efficient team.
Yeah. All right, I will set the timer for another 2 minutes so we can start thinking about the what needs these personas have, these roles.
Fantastic. That's some really good inputs there. Any last thoughts before we move on? Anything that's critical that we're missing?
And there may be. The more I'm reading what everybody is writing, I realize I'm going in completely different direction, which I like because it's very inspiring.
Right.
It sounds like, the same thing I said during the last design thinking session is like, I wish we had a user. Right? The same thing in the previous design thinking session when I was like, oh, we can guess what's happening. The reason why I know about the first one, Subledger APAR, is because that's what my girlfriend is doing as a job, right? So I'm like, oh, I know this. In purchasing, I have no idea. I think my brother-in-law is doing that. I've called him and asked him to join.
You'll have your whole family here on the next design session then.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Hey, Pierre, to that point, are you at some point going to go and have some personas and actually interview them? Because that would be very helpful to take some of this and identify the extreme and real extreme users and also primary users and actually go do short interviews with them to understand what are their challenges, what are they thinking, what would good look like, right? And that could add some color to this, some real color.
I agree 100%, and I suggest we do that. So if you want, we can you can shoot me an email after, and we're gonna follow up this to make sure that we create a full persona out of this, because that's gonna be useful even in our partnership with Microsoft later on. So I like it.
Okay, looks like we've all finished. So happy to move on and do the which.
So which one of these, all of these, do we think fits within these needs that we've identified?
Which is always a tricky one for me.
I can see payments, lending, and insurance. I'm not sure about investments. Thoughts?
Right. Yeah, and this is all about outbound cash. It sort of reduces the investment part of it.
I mean, I can see investment if you're like buying producers, right? Like you could be investing in 3 different products. So for example, one in China, one in Bangalore, and one in Thailand. I don't know, I'm making it up. But just to mitigate your own risk in the future. That's the only investment part I could see. So if you need to source material and stuff, then you might want to diversify your investment according to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I would also commodities. If you're buying commodities, like for example, metals, oil, and things like that, sometimes you may want to have that depending on how you want it. Whether you have to supply that, or let's say you're doing things like derivatives, right? Some of those will actually go and buy the metal, so you have the purchase in there, right?
Is that kind of hedging and kind of products, or treasury products?
It could be hedging. It could also, yeah, but it would be mostly for commodities.
Yeah, especially in those days where commodities are like, I mean, sourcing of commodities is kind of shifting. I'm sure people need to assess a way to do that. Like, let's say if you're working with cobalt, for example, right? I mean, the main source of cobalt being in Congo, like, how are you going to get this? If you're building an electric car, you need cobalt to make your battery. So that you're right, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And if you're doing like wheat, like, for like agricultural produce or things like that, or wheat, anything that's a source material where you want to do. Yeah.
Embedded commodity trades or options.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
I think cash management was the one I put in because most of the times you need funds in local accounts from a regulatory perspective or to make those local payments.
I think this is where you may even have supply chain finance here too. There's an interface into it here.
And what about lending? Because you may want to borrow to pay something, right? If it's more efficient to borrow and pay rather than pay out of your cash balance. Or if you don't have funds, you need to borrow and then make payments. And this is something that, for example, there's a vendor who's done this in Tide. Tide is a bank here.
Yep.
Where they've embedded the ability to borrow to pay an invoice. So in the request to pay kind of model, when you receive request to pay and you don't have funds in your account, then you may want to get a loan in real time.
Anything else within payments? We did talk about this a lot in our previous section. Any next level to kind of dive into there? I know we see FX payments here.
And I don't see a lot of detailing on the insurance side as well.
Yeah.
There's a very basic payments challenge in ERPs, like at least in ours there is when you're submitting payments to the bank, like right now it's like an export. You have to export like some XML file or something that ends up getting imported in whatever your bank's channel is. Like that's kind of a very basic problem that needs to be solved. How do you make that seamless?
Yes, and Steve, this is where I was coming with the power, using like something like Power Automate and Power Power Apps to do that, because a lot of those things are very kludgy. Like there's a lot of pre-processing that has to be done, then the ERP does it, and then the post-processing. But all that could be actually stitched and to be simplified, and calling a lot of those things so that it's seamless behind the scenes. It just works, right? You don't have to have a lot of touch points, and there's a workflow that you can actually enable for that, so you can simplify that process.
Nice, thank you, Madhav. Good points.
So there's this concept of payments being released as they get closer to the destination or where you're procuring them for, especially raw materials. And some of them lose value in transit, especially perishables. So there are new concepts of ensuring perishables or different types of products that are in transit.
Is there a IoT play in this?
There is.
Okay, that will be part of the how, I suppose.
Tracking, the tracking might be important too, right?
Yeah, quality of goods. Yeah, that's all the how. So that's logistics and the phygital world. So it's a mix of the physical and digital.
All right, let's move into the last section. So the how, because we have about 10 minutes left. So.
All right, I'm going to set the timer for, I'm going to do 3 minutes, and then we can discuss.
Just a minute left.
I think that's a good point. I don't know who put that in, but about the there are a lot of parts of the procure to pay process that are like we're thinking so much about the end payment. Like what about the purchase rack, the request for a quote, all that stuff that happens before it? Is there anything that makes sense there?
Yeah, put that in there because there's a whole lot. That's where it starts, right? Like, how do you simplify that process? And you have some companies that actually do that, but a lot of time they're sometimes disjointed from the ERP system, and they're sometimes not fully automated or simplified.
Saying one of the use cases we might have missed, and we hear a lot of payments fraud. So especially
very
for
good point.
B2B payments, that's something to consider later on. As a need, how do you reduce fraud? especially in trade where it's cross-border and you don't know who the recipient is. Or
Yeah, we wrote identifying sourcing risk, but we didn't talk about fraud. That's a very good point. Seeing a lot of typing still, so we'll give everyone a couple minutes since we're at the end.
There's some really fantastic points in here. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions on anything that people put down? Further ideas, thoughts?
I mean, the more I read what people put, the more idea I get from it, but I'm afraid to divulge too much, so yeah.
Or you can add one last one, Pierre, before we close.
I'll keep it for later. I think with Adeniyi, we might review those boards and put them into persona and everything. That would be powerful. And by we, Katrina, I kind of volunteer you as well for it, but we'll see how it works because you're already very, 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 very busy. So.
Awesome. So I think we've made good progress. We've tackled 2 sections amongst a lot of different opportunity spaces within the ERP sort of segments. It would be ideal to have done this for as many as possible, but given time, we've done just 2. Question to the Microsoft team. Are you happy with the way this has been laid out? Is this going to be useful for the hackers? Anyone else that wants to comment on the outputs that we have so far?
Yeah, it looks good
I think
from my standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
There's a little bit of an echo.
Yeah. He agreed. I could summarize that.
You totally agree. We have been able to, I think, do the empathy and the ideation, or actually define the problem, if you will. So anyone who's going to take this from ideation and prototype, or if you do the double diamond, we've been able to do the first half of the diamond, right? The second half will be identifying the 2 epics or use cases and then going deep and then ideating through that and prototyping through that quickly to come up with the MVP or, but not forgetting the business model canvas.
So far we've not actually had the time to even touch the business model canvas, but it's something that, personally I'm very interested in helping you with if we want to have a separate session sometime next week, because there are a lot of interesting things such as, how we will deliver whatever solution the hackers are building and create that ecosystem. And that in itself is a huge problem, I think. So it's a really big space and we've really just scratched the surface at the moment. So happy to carry on the conversation if you want to. Any last comments, Pierre, before we wrap?
No, I think that was very valuable. To be honest, when I came in this session, I was thinking, oh, we might end up going back into learning as a service, which is kind of what we did last time.
Right.
And that was actually pretty brilliant. We steer it into different direction. Even if we touch lending as a service, we confirm kind of the work we've done so far. I really like the direction this is going because it's very different. So it's a very good content. I'm looking forward to see what hackers will do from this, right? I'd love to see what kind of output they could come from all of this. I hope a lot of people will see the session because there is a lot of very good ideas that I think would be extremely relevant for the market.
Definitely agree.
Thank you, Pierre.
Well, thank you, everyone. We will end now, and hopefully we'll see you at some of the next sessions coming up this week and next week.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Sohini and Katrina, for driving. You've been amazing.
Our pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Right.